We're talking about the recent collapse of one of Australia's biggest transport and logistics companies, which has disrupted supply chains and increased the challenges faced by small regional businesses to get their products to larger distribution centres in capital cities. And we're speaking with Dr. Elizabeth Jackson, supply chain expert from Curtin University, about this issue. Welcome to the show, Dr. Jackson.
Thank you very much. An absolute pleasure to be with you.
Not a problem. So, Scott's Refrigerated Transport is the company that has collapsed. So, can you tell us what have been the knock-on effects of the collapse of this company?
So what we're seeing, most unfortunately, and it's patchy throughout Australia, so it's really been the eastern states of Australia that have been affected most. Western Australia has certainly been affected, but not quite as bad as the eastern states. But what we've seen is just yet another disruption to our flows of products in our supply chains. And I think this is a key point to make when we're talking about logistics and supply chains, because really logistics and supply chains work on the flows of products, among other things. And when there is a disruption to that flow, we don't access everything that we're used to, whether that's as a consumer or whether that's a business that is using services of the supply chain. So the knock-on effects that we've seen from the closure of Scott's Transport, or the demise of Scott's Transport, I should say, is that we've seen products at rest for too long in the supply chain. And what do I mean by at rest? Products should be flowing through a supply chain nice and fluidly. So, sometimes, products, particularly products in our cold chains, like meat, for example, or fresh food, they shouldn't be in a warehouse or a cold chain for very long. They need to keep flowing through the supply chain. But what we've seen with the demise of Scott's Transport is that we don't have enough vehicles to keep those flows going. So instead of products sitting for maybe 1 or 2 days, they're sitting for 2 or 3 weeks. And not only is that bad for product quality, but it also incurs so many costs in the supply chain. And what's particularly interesting about the situation with cold chains is that they're expensive to run because of essentially to keep these goods cold. So we're seeing goods at rest, which is no good, goods at rest for too long in the supply chain. But we're also seeing increased costs in the supply chain, which nobody wants.
Now, we know the problems faced by producers and retailers, and especially out in rural areas, small towns a long way from any major cities. How has this collapse intensified the problems already faced by producers and retailers?
The work that's been done in regional areas in terms of business innovation and supply chain innovation is something really to applaud. The innovation and the creativity is just absolutely fascinating, and is such a credit to our friends in the regions. But the thing is, they are at the mercy of logistics systems and supply chains because their products have got an extra distance to travel. And when they've got an extra distance to travel, that obviously means more cost, more expense. So part of their business plan needs, their business plans need to take that into account. And when they can't book transport to move their product, for example, from the regions into the cities where so much of the business is, that can be a real blow for them. And I tell you what, it's not funny when you've got fresh food that needs to be put through the supply chains and you can't book transport to move that product, because some serious waste starts to become then. And of course, there's no waste as bad as food waste.
In your expert opinion, do you think there is an over-reliance on a single cold chain provider in Australia?
Yeah, so what we've seen, the closure of Scott's Transport should not have been a problem. We should have been able to pivot to other service providers for this. But unfortunately, what we saw with the demise of Scott's Transport is this exposure, this risk and this exposure that we've got to this heavy reliance on major cold chain service providers and essentially, and how vulnerable they have been over the last couple of years. So they've been really badly knocked around by COVID, but also they're being terribly knocked around, like all of us at the moment, with inflation. Not only is inflation costing households, a great deal more in living expenses, but it's also costing businesses, and every business throughout the supply chain is suffering because of the increase in inflation, and we're having trouble, and all businesses are having trouble growing because of the interest rates. It's really hard to invest.
And how much is a shortage of truck drivers adding to the problem? You touched on it earlier about not having enough vehicles, but are there enough drivers as it is? Do we need more drivers, or is it purely an issue of not having enough vehicles?
It's absolutely not having enough drivers. The industry, in collaboration with the government, but in my observation, it's really been private enterprise and private industry that has really been leading the way in recruiting and creating opportunities for new drivers to come in because they are so desperately needed. For example, where I'm from in Western Australia, the Western Roads Federation has been doing some wonderful work with our TAFE system to increase opportunities for training of new drivers. I believe last week there was an announcement that $3.1 million has been added to the existing program to encourage new people into the industry and to train them up responsibly to get them into the system. It's a genuine problem. It's a real problem, and the industry is working hard to address this because we realise that without logistics, businesses can't grow.
Dr. Elizabeth Jackson, supply chain expert from Curtin University. Thank you very much for joining us. It's definitely a big issue and one that we'll keep an eye on as the weeks and months go on, but thank you for your time.
Thank you so much indeed for the opportunity.